Well, I'm joined in the studio by the Home Secretary, Suella Braverman. Thanks very much for coming in. We want to talk about Meta and Facebook in a short while. But before we get to that, can I ask you, first of all, about the allegations surrounding Russell Brand? As a woman and as a Home Secretary, what do you think it says about the state of policing and justice in this country that women who say that they have been abused, of course he denies it, are happier to talk to a journalist than they are to go to the police?
Well, the allegations, which we've all been watching and listening to, are extremely serious and very concerning. We know that some complaints have been made now to the Met Police, and there is going to be an investigation. I want to allow that process to play out, and I encourage all victims to come forward to the police so a proper legal process may be considered.
Caroline Noakes, who we spoke to on this programme, she described what went on as a potential abuse of power. Women were clearly afraid to come forward, and we heard from the Met yesterday that they think it might take years for them to get rid of corrupt and dangerous police officers. As Home Secretary, how can you empower women to come forward and complain? They obviously don't want to.
Well, I mean, I recognise there are challenges when it comes to the investigation and prosecution of rape and serious sexual offences. It's something that, as a government, we've been focused on for several years. That's why we set out an end-to-end rape review a few years ago, and we're delivering on our targets. And actually, we are on target to reach our goals. So, for example, in the last few months and years, we've increased the number of charges charges and referrals relating to rapes. We've increased the number of prosecutions and we've increased the number of convictions. So we're making progress. There's always more to do, but there has been a huge amount of resource ploughed into the system. So, for example, we've increased the number of independent sexual violence advisors, ISVAs, who are an independent person who can support directly a victim of rape who comes forward. It can be an extremely traumatic process and it can be a long process. But those advisors can make a real difference between success and failure when it comes to a prosecution. And ultimately,
not in every police
we
force,
want justice for victims.
That's the problem, isn't it? They need to be in every single police force and in every single police station.
Well, that's why I announced the national rollout of a pioneering new model called Operation Soteria earlier this year. That is going to mean that every force in England and Wales will adopt a game-changing model of investigation and prosecution of rape. And we've seen very good results in some of the forces which have piloted this, such as Avon and Somerset.
OK. Let's move on to something the Prime Minister has said today. It's been reported that the Prime Minister is to row back on a raft of green pledges that he's made about the date of banning petrol and diesel cars, about the rollout of new boilers, replacement for gas. So is the government now not committed to meeting its net zero targets by 2050? Because some will say that this is a massive U-turn.
No, we absolutely remain committed to delivering net zero by 2050 in line with our international agreements. Now, as the Home Secretary, you wouldn't expect me to preempt what the Prime Minister is going to set out in more detail later this week. But it's right that we aspire to roll out these policies and remain steadfast in that commitment. We've achieved a huge amount in the last 10 years or so, reducing carbon emissions, increasing renewable generation output. But we also need to adopt an approach of pragmatism and proportionality. And fundamentally, we're not going to save the planet by bankrupting the British people.
But what about the car industry in particular? If this date to ban selling new diesel and petrol cars moves from 2030, say moves back 5 years, 10 years, this makes a massive difference to the car industry. You know, we saw Kemi Badenoch up at Mini's electric plant in Cowley last week. Jaguar Land Rover, a huge investment into electric cars. I mean, have you talked to the electric car industry and said, look, the bottom might be about to fall out of your market because we're going to shift this date?
Well, as I said, we need to put economic growth first. We need to put household costs and budgets first. We need to put the cost of living first. And we're only going to achieve that net zero target whereby people and the British people can go about their daily lives using their cars, using the facilities that are available to them in a pragmatic way. As I said, I'm not going to get into the details. I'm not going to prejudge what the Prime Minister is going to set out in detail. But I would say I do commend him for taking difficult decisions, long-term decisions in the national interest and in the interest of the British people.
Former Tory MP Chris Skidmore says we will look back on this moment as Sunak's slow-motion car crash. those who are concerned about the environment within the Conservative Party see this as a massive rowing back on what the Prime Minister's promised.
As again, I would say everyone should just wait until they hear the detail from the Prime Minister himself. But as I said, I'm incredibly proud of what we've achieved over the last 10 years. We've quadrupled the output from renewable energy sources. We've halved carbon emissions. That's thanks to this government's unwavering commitment to reducing the use of fossil fuels and improving the use of renewable energies and making our economy cleaner and greener. We have to support household budgets. We don't want to bankrupt the British workers, and we need to ensure there's an approach of pragmatism and proportionality.
You're here today because you've got real concerns about Meta, the company that owns Facebook, and encryption and concerns around the safeguarding of children. You've written a letter to Meta. Lots of people have signed it. But realistically, you're actually powerless, aren't you, to force international companies like them to develop safeguards to protect children. If Meta refuses to your polite request through this letter, what are the consequences? There aren't any for them, are there?
Can I just set out the crisis as I see it when it comes to the risk to children posed by online sexual predators? Last year alone, there were 32 million instances globally of online child sexual abuse. In the UK, in our country, we arrest approximately 100 perpetrators a month. We safeguard about 1,200 children a month who are victims of this heinous crime. And the forum of choice is Facebook Messenger and Instagram Direct of these paedophiles. And what they're doing is they're contacting unsolicited children online, they're grooming them, they're manipulating them, and in many instances, they're coercing them into performing degrading, sexual, indecent acts on film, on camera, filming them, uploading that footage or film and sharing it around. It's devastating. I've met victims and survivors of this evil and disgusting crime, and it has a huge impact on their families, on parents. It undermines confidence. Now, my priority is to protect children, not paedophiles. And what I'm very alarmed by is that Meta's proposal to roll out end-to-end encryption without safety measures will enable paedophiles to operate in a safe haven. They will prevent and severely disable law enforcement, like the National Crime Agency, from intervening, identifying these perpetrators, arresting and securing justice and safety for children.
But we would all, I'm sure everybody would agree with the sentiment for what you're saying, but the point is, what difference is a letter going to make? I mean, fundamentally, do you as a government have to accept that these companies in Silicon Valley have more power and control over our children than you as a government do, and you're powerless to stop them? A letter isn't going to stop them. Why are they going to change?
Well, I'm engaging with Meta. We have a dialogue with them and I'm wanting to work with them constructively. We value their presence in the UK. I value innovation. I value privacy as well. But I can't compromise on child safety. I mean, we have just completed the stages of our landmark flagship legislation in the Online Safety Bill. That will make the UK one of the safest places in the world to be online, with a particular focus on child safety. And it puts more responsibilities on these social media companies, which do have a lot of power in our modern day society, to take responsibility, to roll out technology if it will protect children, to remove indecent material, criminal material, to work with law enforcement to prevent this kind of evil behaviour from continuing. I urge Meta to work with us constructively so that we can safeguard children and so that Meta is not a safe haven for paedophiles.
In a word, would you consider just saying that you can't operate here if you don't?
I don't want to get into that kind of territory. I want to work with Meta. I want them to work with us. I believe the technology does exist. We know that there's a solution that can meet Meta's objectives but also meet my objectives. We know from the tech industry, from the experts in the field, from organisations like Internet Watch Foundation, the NSPCC, that there is a technological solution that protects children online but also manages the needs of Meta. And I am encouraging them, calling them and urging them to adopt that technology and roll it out more broadly.
Suella Braverman, Home Secretary, thank you very much for coming in.